We have completed our walk through the book of Genesis, and I've had so many people comment how much that they really appreciated moving through the book of Genesis this summer. We are entering into Exodus, and I'm going to continue our walk through our Old Testament stories. Today we have heard the story of the birth of Moses, and it is rooted in first that time has passed. So at the end of the Joseph story that we heard last week, Joseph had reconciled with his brothers. He had encouraged them to move to Egypt because he was sort of second in command in Egypt to Pharaoh, and that it would be a good place for the Israelite people, the chosen people, to be. So now when we get to the story, at least a generation or two has passed. We don't know exactly how long, but time has gone by. And the very ominous verse 8, the first verse which Larry read, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And so Joseph's memory is no longer protecting the Israelite people. They are seen as outsiders, as people who may be a threat to the kingdom. And so Pharaoh's first idea is to work them harder. It says they were multiplying, don't give them enough energy to keep multiplying, so to speak. So he tries to work them, and that doesn't seem to have any effect. And so he comes to genocide, and he says to the midwives, which we don't know if Shiphrah and Puah were Hebrew or not, but he says to them, when you are helping these Israelite women deliver, if it's a boy, kill him. And they, it says, fear God and are unwilling to do this. And so they get hauled before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asks them, why are these babies still alive? To which they very bravely lie right to his face and say, well, these Hebrew women, they're so strong and hardy, they give birth before the midwife even gets to them. So his next, evil plan is to cast all of the boys into the river. So it says that a Levite woman and a Levite man, so this is the priestly class now of the Israelite people, have a child. It is not their first child because there's a sister and a brother at least, which are still alive. And they have a child while this decree is in place. And so Moses' mother knows this and tries to conceal her child. Well, after 3 months, that becomes impossible for whatever reason. And so she decides to set this child into the Hebrew actually is an ark of bulrushes. That's what the literal translation of what she uses would be ark. So hearkening back to the Noah story, which of course concludes with God's promise never to forsake the people again, right? So she places him in this ark and sends Miriam, Moses' sister, to watch over the basket as it goes down the river, probably hoping and praying that something like Pharaoh's daughter, taking the child in is exactly what happens. So I always think to myself, boy, in some ways Moses' mother got it good. She got paid to nurse her own child. How many mothers would like to see that happen, right? Only mother in history got paid to nurse her own child. So she nurses this child, and this child ends up being raised basically as the prince in Pharaoh's house. Of course, we will hear more of the story about how he comes to lead the Hebrew slaves out of slavery. Now, whenever I hear this story, I cannot help but think of Dr. Bruce Birch, the man who taught me Hebrew Bible, who always tells this story to his students whenever he gets to the Exodus story. He tells the story of going through his own PhD dissertation. So he's been through years of learning biblical Hebrew and research and writing, and he's ready to defend his PhD dissertation. He's got all of this knowledge, running around in his head, and the first question he gets from this crotchety old scholar is, what were the names of the midwives who delivered Moses? To which Bruce looked at him blankly and said, I don't know. So every one of Bruce Birch's students has been sworn to commit to memory the names Shiphrah and Puah. Hebrew midwives. It is notable, a couple of things about the language here. First, Shiphrah and Puah are named. Not all women are named in Scripture because we're not considered important enough to name. But Shiphrah and Puah are named, and notice the Pharaoh isn't. So early hearers of that story would have caught that nuance, that the important people in the story are the midwives, right? Pharaoh is the one who is being outsmarted. He actually believes their lies when they say, oh, well, those Hebrew women, they're so strong that, we can't even get there before they give birth, And interestingly, too, this is the first time that we come across the word Hebrew. Up until then, we've talked about the Israelites, right? Jacob's name in Genesis was changed to Israel. His 12 sons became the father of the 12 tribes and the Israelites. So where does this term Hebrew come from? It is actually a term that comes up across the ancient Near East in various cognates and versions in different languages. And it's basically a term for low-class folks. Sometimes it comes up aparu, and it refers to people on the margins with no social standing, no land, and who are seen as being disruptive in society. And so now the Israelites are being called Hebrews, which is, basically a derisive term. Walter Brueggemann notes that Pharaoh moves from oppression, and when that doesn't work, he moves to genocide. And notice, too, that Pharaoh talks directly to the midwives. That is another way, again, of showing, one, the amazing ways that God works, that Pharaoh would speak directly to these midwives, and also that Pharaoh's power is circumvented by this unlikely source, these two simple servants, these two midwives. And so it is intended to be humorous and ironic that the weakest, as the world sees it, is really smarter and more powerful than the strongest. And that is very often how God works. So as Moses' mother obeys the decree as best she can, she puts her baby on the water, there is a lot of trust that goes into that, right? I mean, I'm trying to imagine having my 3-month-old baby and putting him in a little ark and setting him on the water. That is a whole heap and lot of trust right there, isn't it? And this led me to think about the link between faith and trust and even flexibility. I think that one of the greatest gifts of faith is that it allows us to live in trust, that in the end, God wins, that the worst things are never the last things, that one of the challenges of faith is letting go of the need to be in control. That phrase, let go and let God. And we are given daily opportunities to choose whether we trust more or cling more deeply to our own misguided attempts to be in control, to be the arbiters of our own future. I think that's one challenge that's even greater for people of our day and time. I'm a big believer there's not much new under the sun. Things are really not that much more spectacular in the 1950s or the 1850s. We just tend to have rose-colored glasses about such things, right? But I really do think that our modern conveniences, our advances in medical science, our advances in the weather, give us a greater illusion of being in control, right? Of being able to control how things go. Think about it, even just the hurricane that we've had all of this warning about, right? The devastation is still awful. People have had to evacuate, but 150 years ago, there would have been no evacuations. They would have just got hit by a hurricane, right? There would have been no weather predictions about it. They wouldn't have existed. Or think about our medical advances. What's the most frustrating thing about going and getting a medical diagnosis? Not getting a diagnosis, right? We can handle pretty much whatever comes if we know, okay, this is the plan. This is what's wrong. This is what we're going to do. But some of the most anxiety-producing things that can happen is if we don't have answers, right? And we think of that as that's not how it should be. Medical science should be able to figure this out. So we have all of these ways in which I would argue that one of the greater challenges for us as people of faith is to learn to let go and let God, to let go of the need to be in control, to be daily practicing the ability to trust God and to trust and to be flexible, that the way that things have always been are not going to be the way that things will always be, especially in our time of great change. Several years ago, I was the chair of the Volunteers and Mission Committee for the conference, which is our mission trip sending organization. And so I worked with other coordinators in other conferences and the jurisdictional coordinator for the Northeast. And Greg Forrester, in his training for teams, used to tell this fabulous story. It was about one of his first trips to Haiti. Every year he would lead a trip to Haiti, and he was using this to illustrate what he called the beatitude of anyone on a mission trip, which is, blessed are the flexible. And so they got to Haiti. Their mission, as they understood it, the task before them was to build a church, and they were looking forward to building this church. So, they get there on a weekend. Monday morning, they show up. All there is to do is to clear the lot of brush because there are no building supplies at all. So, that takes this team of 15 or so people about an hour, to clear all the brush, and then they're twiddling their thumbs. So they notice that there are some children around curiously watching them. So they get out a soccer ball and they get out some crafts that they brought with them, and they spend the whole rest of the day playing with these children and absolutely delighted these children. Well, the people in Haiti who were in charge of this project had said that the building supplies would be there Tuesday. Tuesday comes. You know what they said? Oh, we didn't need this Tuesday. No building supplies. So, again, they are playing with children, they're playing soccer, they're doing crafts, they're singing songs, they're having the time of their lives. It wasn't until about 2 days before the trip ended that any building supplies ever made it to the site. And you know what? Even though they hardly did any of what it was that they thought that they were arriving to do, even though they barely got started on building this church, they did exactly what God had for them to do that week. They were able to take that curve and just trust that God intended for them to spend a week with those Haitian children, teaching and blessing them. Blessed are the flexible. And so, as we think about what kind of challenge this text presents to us this day, my question to you is, how do you allow God to teach you to trust? How do you cooperate with the Holy Spirit in small matters and practice being flexible and adapting and adjusting when matters don't go as you expect or as you want them to? How do you react when the ways you have always done something is now to be done differently? How do you respond when events don't go as you envision them going? This could be in your family life, your church life, and any part of life. God doesn't stand still. And very often God is in the twists and the turns and the ups and the downs and the things that we do not expect. God doesn't stand still. And our choices are allowing God to teach us how to trust, how to adapt, how to grow and change, or to spend our lives in a state of semi-continuous upset and anxiety. I know people like this too. Every curveball, everything that goes differently than they expect makes them anxious. Do you know people like this? And I always hope and pray that some measure of God's peace will quiet them and allow them to just trust that God is in it. In my third or fourth year of serving as a pastor, my district superintendent at the time was John Mitchell. He has since died. And John and I were talking about something, and he had on his mind that he needed somebody to host a district clergy meeting, and nobody was stepping forward. Part of the challenge was that he had been doing these for a few years, and people had all exhausted their daytime church servants who could come and cook lunch for clergy. They just ran out of those people. And so I said, well, we asked people to chip in $6 for lunch. That's enough to get a box of lunch from Subway for everybody. If you want to do it that way, then I could host. And he said, "That's a spectacular idea. Let's do that. You'll host, we'll get food from Subway." So we had it all arranged. I placed the order. His house happened to be nearest to the Subway, so he said he'd pick up the sandwiches. He gets to the church. It's about 10 minutes before noon when the meeting's just supposed to start. He walks in and he says, "So, how did the sandwich pickup go?" And I said, "I can go get them. No problem at all. I thought you were getting them, but it's really no problem." And he was like, "I'm just messing with it. You're no fun." Later, after he had been my superintendent for a few more years and then become the pastor at another church in the district, he and I were having dinner. And he gave me one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. He was talking about not only that time, but a time when something had not gone as I had hoped it would go in my last appointment. And he said, "You know, Amy, I think that's one of your greatest strengths, that you can just roll with the punches, go with the flow. Don't let setbacks, set you back, but keep on keeping on." And I really took that as high praise from him. To me, that is an act of cooperating with the Holy Spirit, of trusting that no matter what comes, that God is somehow in it or working to redeem it. And so, in practicing trust in God in the small matters, we are able to allow God to teach us how to trust in the big matters. When we are facing things like Moses' mother faced, and faced with the question of what will we do with our 3-month-old child that Pharaoh wants to see dead. I was in a training for these past 3 days, and there was someone there who served as a missionary for several years. And he told a story about, he didn't tell it for this reason, but it struck me this way, about how he trusted God through what could have been a really difficult time. He served a very underprivileged congregation that was in a lot of ways exploited. And there was a landlord in the community who was in the practice of exploiting these people who were in his church, really renting them lousy properties to live in. The News Journal had even done a piece on this person. And as part of his ministry, he had spoken publicly, calling this landlord to account for, basically being a slumlord. Well, it turned out that this man was also a member of a United Methodist Church. And that United Methodist Church had agreed, along with a lot of other United Methodist churches, to provide support to this missionary for his ministry. Well, first, that man's church's support fell off. And then word got around the county, and other churches were sending their donations in for his missionary support. And so the district superintendent called and said, "We have a problem. People are not sending in their support for your salary." And you know what his response was? He just laughed and he said, "That's not my problem. I'm sure you can fix it." And ended the call. And I thought, boy, I would have lost all kinds of sleep if that had happened to me. I mean, I would have laid awake at night worrying about that, but not him. His immediate response was to trust that it would work out, that somehow the district superintendent and the church would find a way to make it right, and they did. Would I be able to trust in that kind of situation? Would I be able to put my child in that basket, in that ark, and place him in the river, and trust that God's purposes would be fulfilled? It's a tough question. And the next time something doesn't go the way you expect it, or the next time a setback comes or a curveball hits, I invite you to take it as an opportunity to grow in trust, in the ability to believe in the strength of God's Spirit, that God is in it, that God is redeeming it, and that God is worthy of our trust. To let go and let God, and to watch how God works in large and small ways for the good of God's people in this world. May it be so. Amen.